have now been delayed as the president and this administration monitors these developments. As one White House official told me, they are watching and waiting along with the rest of the world. As you point out, President Biden and his top officials have been preparing for him to make some type of statement, remarks, reaction once there is a verdict. But earlier today, during an event, he was speaking and was asked about the trial, and he said that he prays that the jury reaches the right verdict. Now, those comments came under an immense amount of scrutiny. We asked the press secretary about it repeatedly. Was it appropriate for President Biden to weigh in on the verdict in that way before, in fact, the jury had come out and spoken? She denied that he was trying to put his finger on the scale. Instead, she noted that he had spoken to the family of George Floyd, that this was clearly an emotional time for them, for the rest of the country, and he was clearly echoing that. Now, taking a step back, Lester, we know that the administration has been in close contact with state and local officials. They are urging the public to remain calm once there is a verdict, that if there are protests, for them to be peaceful protests. And of course, that echoes what we are hearing from the family as well. We'll be watching closely to see what President Biden has to say when and if, in fact, he does speak publicly after there is a verdict. We know that the issue of criminal justice, of racial equality, has been one that he has spoken about quite extensively. And right now, the administration, from a legislative perspective, has been pushing for Congress to move forward with a bill titled the George Floyd bill, which would make it easier to prosecute police misconduct. So that is the scene here behind the scenes within the Biden administration as they watch and wait for a verdict. Lester?
Kristen, thank you. We are past 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, within the window now when we would expect to hear from the jury their verdict in the case of former officer Chauvin. While we await that verdict, let me bring in Eugene Robinson. He's a Washington Post columnist and NBC News political analyst. Eugene, always good to see you. This is a moment of deep breath for everyone. We're all emotionally tied to the story because we were witnesses to it, to the extent that we saw that videotape of George Floyd dying under the knee of a police officer. As we await this verdict on 3 charges, what, in your view, should we be keeping in mind? What's our deep breath? What should it look like right now?
Well, we should try to remember that this verdict will be about the specific officer and what he specifically did that day to George Floyd. That this is a micro situation with macro implications, with implications for the whole country, and for so many of us, for so many African American men, Lester, it's personal. It feels intensely personal. Could that have been me under Derick Chauvin's knee for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? Could it have been one of my sons who found himself in that situation? And so this case, it's not just that it has taken on an outsized importance. It really does symbolize so much about this country's 400-year struggle with race and this country's, frankly, refusal to sort of acknowledge and grapple with the concept and reality of systemic racism, especially in policing. And so we've been so many of these incidents and so many of these deaths, and frankly, we've seen so many verdicts go in favor of police officers who were acquitted. And there was a sense in this case, because it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and because the video went around the world, there was a sense that this is where we have to draw a line, that this has to be seen as unacceptable by everyone, regardless of race, whoever you are. You have to see this as having been unacceptable. So now the question is that the way the jury saw it? And will the jury, in essence, ratify what many of us all think we saw in in that video, or will they take a different view? And what does that say to African Americans and to us personally about how we are seen in this country and how we are treated and how we are regarded? George Floyd was not treated like a citizen by Derick Chauvin. He wasn't treated like a member of the public that Derick Chauvin was sworn to protect. I think we could all agree on that. Yet that's what we're supposed to be, and that's what we have a right to be. And so, just an awful lot seems to hang on what these poor 12 people decide. My sympathies are with the jury because this has got to be difficult for them. And it's certainly got the rest of us on tenterhooks, just waiting to hear what they decided.
Yeah, they are sequestered, but they are certainly citizens of this country and this world, and certainly have to have some inkling, if not a lot of inkling, about the climate in this country. Eugene Robinson, thank you. Let me go back to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez. I understand our audio connection is back, and so Gabe, let me ask you about what will happen in the courtroom. The verdict will be read. What would you expect to see next?
Well, Lester, it's such a highly anticipated moment. The jury will be brought into the courtroom. The verdict will be read. They'll go through the three charges, as you've been discussing, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, and a verdict will be read for each of those charges. Then, shortly after the jury is let go, we anticipate the Attorney General, Keith Ellison. He will be speaking publicly, and then sometime after that, we also expect to hear from the Floyd family. But what happens after that, of course, local authorities have been urging folks here to stay calm. As I was mentioning earlier, and we can see even a growing crowd here that has been gathering here right outside the courthouse. But again, just a few moments away potentially about hearing this verdict, something that has been so long awaited here in Minneapolis. But yes, we expect the verdict to be read. There's also the consideration of whether there will be aggravating factors in this case. In other words, bumping up any potential sentence. We don't expect sentencing to happen right away, but as has been discussed, Lester, each of these charges carries up to a certain amount based on if there are several aggravating factors. In this case, we're told that the judge will decide on those aggravating factors, but with a second-degree murder, the maximum penalty being 40 years in prison, with a third-degree murder maximum being 25, and then the maximum for second-degree manslaughter being 10 years. But the recommended sentencing for each of those charges, based on first-time offenders like Derick Chauvin would be, that is much shorter, 12 and a half years or so for the first two charges, second and third degree murder, and 4 years for second degree manslaughter. So there will still be those outstanding questions on exactly, what a potential sentence would be if there is a conviction. But many of these protesters, and demonstrators right now, they just want to hear what exactly this verdict will be, really, as not just the city of Minneapolis watches, Lester, but really the entire country.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. As we look from above, the aerial view of the park there across from the courthouse, not a lot of people, but certainly a growing crowd that we've been watching there. They, like the rest of us now, anticipating this announcement within the next several minutes is based on the window we've been given, the verdict to be announced by the jury in the Derick Chauvin case. Let me go to NBC correspondent Megan Fitzgerald. She's also in Minneapolis covering the reaction in the city. You've been talking to some of the demonstrators, Megan. What are you hearing? What do they anticipate? What do they expect?
Yeah, Lester, we were out here yesterday when shortly after those closing arguments, hundreds of people filled the streets here in Minneapolis calling for justice for George Floyd. And we talked to people asking them, what does that look like for you? And it's a couple of things here. They say that they want to see a guilty verdict for Derick Chauvin. But they also want to see changes systemically to the way that police in our country. This is a deeply personal moment, a deeply personal trial for people all across the country. And we see that, and we have been seeing that with the diverse crowds of people that have come out and protest across the nation. We talked yesterday to people who flew in from different parts of the country, saying it was important for them to be here to show support to George Floyd's family. In fact, I had an opportunity to speak with them yesterday, asking them how they felt as we awaited the verdict. And they said that they're anxious. They're ready for this entire process to be over, but that they're very hopeful that Derick Chauvin will be found guilty. And they realized the magnitude, just the gravity of this case, telling me that this is bigger than their brother. They feel as though their brother was publicly executed, they say, a modern-day lynching, as they call it. And they say if there is not justice for George Floyd, if there's not a conviction here, that they don't feel hopeful that anybody will get justice. But they were pleased that the protests yesterday here in Minneapolis remained peaceful, and they are calling for peaceful protests moving forward, but certainly hopeful that they will get the verdict that they are hoping for, Lester.
Megan Fitzgerald down there in Minneapolis watching the crowds. Thank you. NBC News legal analyst Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor and Georgetown School of Law professor. Paul, just give me your thoughts as we await this verdict.
So it's a relatively short deliberation process. It's hard to read anything into that. Typically, if it's a short deliberation, the conventional wisdom is that favors the defense. But in a case with this